Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, a pro-Iran Iraqi militia leader, were killed in a US strike targeting their car convoy in Baghdad. Several other Iraqis and Iranians were also killed in the strike. January 8, Iran retaliated against the killing of Mr. Soleimani with a missile attack on Ain al-Assad base, an Iraqi base housing Iraqi and coalition forces, including Americans. Fortunately and/or intentionally, this attack did not lead to loss of lives. Last Sunday, we have seen another escalation, a rocket attack on an air base north of Baghdad, wounding 4 members of Iraq's military. We have this escalation happened against the context of a series of attacks that took place against US installation, US forces, US Iraqi bases where US forces are located. There were 11 attacks preceding in 2019 targeting these installations, attributed to Iraqi militias affiliated with the IRGC. None of them, eventually one of them, the last one, ended up killing an American citizens. This led to US strikes on 29 December targeting weapons depot and command and control installations of Kata'ib Hezbollah, an Iran-linked Iraqi militia across Iraq and Syria, resulting in at least 25 people killed and dozens wounded. This was followed by an attack on the US embassy in Baghdad, organized by the Kata'ib Hezbollah militia and their supporter on the 31st of December. The ratcheting up of tensions in Iraq has been taking place amidst domestic and regional developments. Since October, mass protests have been taking place in Baghdad, in many cities in the south of the country, against corruption and bad governance, and called, among other things, for bringing all weapons, all non-state armed groups like the Popular Mobilization Forces, some of which are Iranian-linked, under state control and ending Iranian dominant role in Iraq's political affair. Post-US and Iranian strikes on Iranian territory, protesters have been calling for ending both Iranian and US presence in the country. Regionally, there has been intensification of military and political tensions between the United States and Iran that played itself out this last summer in the Persian Gulf region. On January 5, amidst all of this, the Iraqi Council of Representatives met and passed a non-binding resolution calling for the removal of US forces from Iraq. There is no consensus among Iraqi political parties on this issue. Except for few exceptions, the parliament session was boycotted by Sunni and Kurdish parliamentarians. The Iraqi caretaker prime minister has now called on the US government to start talks to agree on a joint plan for removal of US forces. The Iraqi government is in a caretaker status following the resignation of Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi last November. Questions have been raised in Iraq as to whether a caretaker cabinet can legally act on the parliamentary non-binding resolution. On Friday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, quote, "Any delegation sent to Iraq would be dedicated to discussing how best to recommit to our strategic partnership, not to discuss troop withdrawal, but our right appropriate force posture in the Middle East," end of quote. Iraq finds itself today at a place it has tried to avoid for some time, stuck in the middle of a military confrontation between the United States and Iran. One question that's being asked often of observers of Iraqi politics today is whether Iraq and the United States can find their way to a pathway that can maintain the strategic partnership between the two countries that is of benefits to both countries. This is one of the questions that I hope, among others, our experts here can help us think through. We have a terrific panel today, and I'm very much thankful for them to agree to participate today. You all have their detailed bios as part of the package. I'll just make brief introductions before I turn over the discussion to the discussion with them. I'm delighted to introduce to my left Joey Hood. He's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the US Department of State. Mr. Hood has spent much of his career working in the Middle East. Next to Mr. Hood is Dr. Shahla Al-Kili. She's a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. She's a Principal Development Specialist at DAI Global. And to my right is Abbas Qadim. Dr. Abbas Qadim. He is Director of the Iraq Initiative at the Atlantic Council and senior advisor to the UNESCO chair at Kufa University in Iraq. We usually use the Menti system, which allows me to, allows you to enter your question and for me to look at them throughout the discussion. And then it looks like our internet is down, so we will not be able to do that. So what we're going to do is spend some time moderating a conversation with the panelists, maybe 3 rounds of question, and then I will turn it over to a session of question and answer with you all. You ask the question, they provide the answers. And I have one suggestion. This whole debate about Iraq in the States has now been on for some time. So I hope that when you ask your question, we can look forward, we can ask questions that have already not been addressed. There's a lot of territory and ground has been covered already in the media about Iraq. So there is no point in rehashing what has already been covered. So I would like to start with my first question to Joey Hood. So in the same set of remarks I quoted earlier from Secretary Pompeo, he also said there needs to be, quote, a conversation between the US and Iraqi governments, not just regarding security, but about our financial, economic, and diplomatic partnership, end of quote. What does this all mean?
Well, thank you, Rhonda. Thank you for inviting me here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And my special greetings to everybody who's watching from Iraq. It's, as you say, a very challenging time for us here right now. So it's important that we talk about every aspect of the US-Iraqi strategic partnership because it's an important one and not one that we should be blithely dismissing one way or the other. I think I would start in answering your question by reading the sentence that follows the one that you quoted, which is, we want to be a friend and partner to a sovereign, prosperous, and stable Iraq. That's the policy goal. And so what do partners do, especially strategic partners? When there's a problem in the relationship, they sit down and they talk about what is the way forward, and not just on one aspect of it, but on all the aspects of it. Because as some of you will remember, when we had some version of this debate about a year ago, what I said at the time was, if you vote out the US military forces, well, then all the coalition partners go with you. And then the investors go right behind those. And then on, you have all of these knock-on effects, because if the US military is out and the coalition is out, then it's very likely ISIS comes back. So you're not going to have a lot of investors very interested in that environment. And then if that happens, then you have problems with the banking relationships, then you have problems with people moving back and forth and all sorts of things that we don't want to see. And so we have to sit down and talk about what would work for both sides. And as the secretary said, that involves recommitting to our strategic partnership. And I should say, I'm very happy to be on this panel with my friends, Dr. Abbas and Dr. Shahla. I couldn't want for
and not with me?
Better. Well, I thanked you for inviting me here, but
thank you. Yeah,
but I'm very happy to have them as my co-panelists, because even though we will disagree, we will do so as friends and neighbors.
Great. So, Abbas, there is, as I said in the introduction, there is no consensus on the issue of US force removal. Yesterday, we saw pictures of a meeting convened by, I'm assuming, Sayyid Muqtada al-Sadr in his residence in Qom, bringing together the leaders of the different PMF factions. And the statement out of the meeting was to call for the establishment or revival of the old resistance front that seeks to remove US forces, if not by diplomatic means. If the diplomatic means fails, then it should be by military means. So, given what Joey has said in terms of US interest in discussing a pathway forward that can recommit to the strategic partnership between the two countries, the United States and Iraq, what's your reading of where Baghdad is? You know, on this issue? And given, again, the lack of consensus among the different political components, what are the scenarios that you see are likely to unfold in the short to medium term?
Well, thank you, Randa, for convening this great panel. And I'm also happy to be with Joey and Shahla. I must also say that probably Joey's time being in charge of US-Iraqi diplomatic relations was the quietest and nicest and easiest time between the two countries.
Pure coincidence.
Yeah, a couple that we spoke about, and actually I was visiting you by the time when one of them was happening, but they were really handled in the best possible manner. So a great, skillful diplomat that I always am proud to be a friend of. Back to your question, here is the deal. I mean, there is no good time for a crisis. But probably even with that caveat, this crisis could not have happened at the worst time. You have a government that has resigned, divided within, and also you have a divided parliament, a divided population. Just remember, why did the government resign? They resigned because there were protests from October 1 and then renewed October 25, and they were nonstop. So there is a very fierce debate for the soul of the entire system and the entire Iraqi regime and its future. There isn't any consensus on anything in Iraq when this happened. And that is sort of, Iraq was needing every minute and second of peace and tranquility and stability to deal with those challenging issues. The last thing it needed was an escalation of a conflict where Iraq was trying almost successfully to steer its way away from it, the US-Iranian conflict. So that was the problem of what was happening. We always have had those people in parliament and elsewhere who did not want the US troops to remain in Iraq. The US troops were never popular. They were not popular in 2003. They remained to be unpopular in 2000 until 2011, and they were unpopular after 2014. That's not to say they were not helping. They were not good for Iraq. It is just the way the Iraqi mentality is composed, a country that has all kinds of history with colonization and post-colonization. They are foreign troops, no matter how you look at it. However, there is an element in government that pragmatically looks at the utility and the benefit of having US troops, whether it is the defeat of ISIS, the training of the Iraqi forces, building capacity of the Iraqi forces, deterrence for any, it's not a nice neighborhood where Iraq is in, and the US troops are deterrence. All of the things that Joey just mentioned correctly, without US troops, NATO, while they are sending troops, they are using the American infrastructure to build, to have their effort. The US aid that goes there also does a lot of great work for Iraq. So many things. But for, it's very hard to see why people don't understand that any people, not just the Iraqis, would like to see their country without foreign troops. That's, the Americans, everyone else. But that aside, I think the Iraqis were split on the position of the troops. Throughout the 2019, there were more than one attempt to get the Iraqi government to ask the Americans for withdrawal after the defeat of ISIS officially. And Adel Abdel Mahdi and his government stood against all of these attempts. And the proponents of expelling US troops from Iraq did not have the vote in parliament, and they did not have the support in government. So those calls went nowhere. They remained to be just a call to get the troops out, rhetoric, nothing more. And I think what happened with the recent escalation, now let's put the escalation in perspective. It started with the attack on the Iraqi base that killed an American citizen. That is important. This was a bait or a trap that was set. And the anticipation of it was not just for the United States to hit back, and then they will revive that call for the US troops. Nobody anticipated that this would lead to a cascade of escalations that would cause the bombing, then the embassy siege, and then ultimately the killing of Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. So we've seen an escalation faster than what was anticipated or even hoped by the provocateurs who started that attack on the base that killed an American citizen. I must conclude with this, is that I'm not here to say what Americans should do, should they retaliate, shouldn't they, all of that. This is just a decision to be made by people who are duly elected to do it, and they take the credit or the blame for whatever the consequences of their decision. And we have a split Congress, we have split, also people view this. I just came from watching a hearing that had people all over the place here in the United States also on what happened. But the point here is that we moved from a situation where the government was 100% against expelling the US troops from Iraq to a prime minister who goes to parliament and says there are two scenarios: getting the American troops or getting the American troops. The first scenario is to get the American troops out, is basically by a longer withdrawal scenario or process. And the other is getting the American troops out of Iraq fast and immediately. And he recommended the immediate withdrawal of the troops. That's a 180-degree reversal of the prime minister's position just from May or even beyond. And that is, I think, what we need to look at in this coming minutes that we have, is to discuss really what the future scenarios, what to focus on right now in the US-Iraqi relations, rather than just trying to revive certain parts of these relations that have, if not permanently, at least for a certain term, they have died. And we will talk about those.
Okay. Shahla, well, it's clear that Baghdad and the KRG do not agree on the issue of US removal from Iraq. Let's look at the COR session that happened with basically one Kurd present, the deputy speaker of the parliament, boycotted. There was in office a statement issued by President Barzani's office voicing support for continuing coalition presence in Iraq. Yet, however, in this past weekend, Mr. Adel Abdel Mahdi went to Erbil and met with Mr. Barzani, and also I think went to Suli and met with people there. And his office put a statement after the visit in which he seemed to indicate that President Barzani would follow the Iraqi federal government lead on this issue, stating that Barzani, quote, said that the Kurdistan region position is to support Iraq's interest and that any decision made by the federal government is the KRG position. So, end of quote. This is an office statement that was put out by Mr. Abdel Mahdi's office after that visit. So help us understand, where is the Kurdish leadership on this? Where is the Kurdish public on these issues as these discussions evolve and unfold between Baghdad and Erbil going forward?
Thank you so much for hosting this important panel. I'm grateful to bring the discussion about the critical issues in Iraq into the Middle East Institute. And I am so happy and honored to be with both my colleagues as the panelists. And I assume that we will disagree on certain issues, but that's the nature of the debates about anything related to Iraq, especially nowadays. In terms of the Kurdish position, I think positions are clarified through actions. The fact that the Kurds boycotted the COR session, and this boycott was based on national interest, Iraqi national interest, but as well as the legal framework for the COR session. Very quick note here, the Supreme Federal Court in Iraq, prior to all these escalations, I think it was back last summer, issued a decree and the Federal Court, Supreme Court of Iraq, its decrees are permanent and final. They issued a decree that the COR has no legal authority to issue decrees. The COR's mandate is to issue legislation and oversight the government work. So on mere legal facts, the Kurds boycotted this session. That's the legal issues that pushed the decision to boycott the session. The national interest, and by national interest I mean Iraqi interest, because we all saw after the referendum and the consequences of the Kurdish referendum in 2017, the Kurdish leadership made a decision to start a process of rapprochement with the Iraqi government and start the conversation about a whole set of chronically pending issues. So the Kurds view themselves in this current stage and the Kurdistan region as part of Iraq. So it's in the Iraq's interest, and I'm referring to former President Barzani's statement right after the COR session, and one night before the Iranian missile hit Erbil, saying, I am all in for the, and I'm paraphrasing here now, I'm all in for the interest and reaching a national consensus for the Iraqi people. I am not into dragging Iraq into a proxy war, but I will be helpful in mediating or being of help in any logical approach that we can take to de-escalate. So the Kurdish position is reflected on the ground by action, and also President Najib Barzani stated clearly that it's not in the interest, of course, of the Kurdistan region, neither in the interest, and I'm talking here about the interest of the Iraqi people at this stage, to call for the expel or to start a negotiation to talk about the expel of the American troops. So that's where the Kurds at. The other part of the picture is not only the Kurds, of course, the Sunnis as well. And the Prime Minister, the resigned Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi, when he visited Erbil 2 days or so before that, he was on TV saying, in a way, and I'm again paraphrasing, that it's come to a realization there is no one component can decide about such critical strategic decision by mere the very light majority there were, and in order to diagnose the facts and analysis, we have to name names. Even within the Shia components, it was only the clearly pro-Iranian, whether right or wrong, I'm not talking about this, but who are clearly pro-Iranian agenda attended that COR session. Most of Shia elites and even liberal progressive Shia did not attend. To some extent, the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Shia elites who boycotted the session actually did a service for Iraqi interests and saved-faced and put a backup plan for the current government to go back after this political show and calm down and then talk to your real partners on the ground in your country about your interests. And Adel Abdel Mahdi was clear in his remarks prior to his visit to Kurdistan to talk about the importance of listening to partners and not taking decisions alone. I would view the Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi's calling for the expel of American troops and some other parties, Shia parties, and the COR's session and all the political show that we put together, and I'm talking here as an Iraqi, we pulled together on that day. It was, again, another step in a very shaky balancing act that the Iraqi government is trying to do since years without having a vision or a real strategy to really have an effective balancing act by which you respect the sovereignty of the Iraqi country, you preserve the government legitimacy, and you move forward amidst such crisis. After the COR session, the Iraqi people have been more split. Right after the session, and we also on social media, there was a huge circulations of a new hashtag. Iraqis are saying, my parliament doesn't represent me. Now, how majority or minority that movement was, it's been exhibited on Friday, January 10th, when despite all the assassination and kidnapping and all that, people were on the streets. And again, people were killed in the Qar and Basra. And to end my comments, I will ask everyone to think about a very specific question. Who is asking for the expel of American troops in Iraq, and the timing? One final point about this, even Prime Minister Abadi Abdel Mahdi was mulling the idea whether he can have a wedge or opportunity to be re-elected again as a prime minister by appeasing Iran and saying, hey, I'm gonna advocate for this. When this did not fly even for 2 days with the Iraqi people, and I am so proud of the political maturity that the Iraqi people, whether in Kurdistan or the rest of Iraq, have shown since October till now in dealing with a very complex and critical issues. Within 2 days, Iraqis call out the bluffs of the political establishment, and then now they are negotiating about another type of rhetorics and narratives with the United States.
Thank you. Well, Joey, so given this, and I think Shahla gave us a good segue in talking about the protesters and what they have been saying. The last protest, basically, we are seeing protesters in the streets saying, US out, Iran out. So this is where they are, the demands. And so there is now this debate in Iraq. After all, this is a democracy. People are voting, and people have been. There is a lively debate in the country about U.S. military presence. And so Iraqi asking, is it worth the price for us, to maintain U.S. presence in the country? They're asking, what have you, America, done for us lately? Mm-hmm. And so this is, I think, a question that we need, to answer Iraqi protesters who are saying, is it worth it for us?
Absolutely. It's a question that we need to answer, and we think we have a very convincing answer to it. The benefits of a strong relationship with the United States are many. Dr. Abbas talked about a few of them earlier, but just to put some numbers to this, we're the largest humanitarian donor to Iraq. We've spent more than $2.5 billion since 2014 putting together funding projects to rehabilitate more than 500 schools, 100 health centers, 50 water treatment plants, for example. It's a long list here. We're also the largest donor to demining. We've helped clear 86 million square meters of land since 2015 alone. We've invested $5.5 billion to strengthen the Iraqi security forces, including the Kurdish Peshmerga. We've also conducted with our coalition partners, including the Iraqi security forces, more than 4,000 operations against Daesh in Iraq alone in 2019. This is huge. But add to it, 2017, the government of Iraq was having economic problems. They issued a $1 billion sovereign loan. We guaranteed it. Prior to that, we lent our support through the International Monetary Fund to make sure that the Iraqi economy didn't collapse through the onslaught of Daesh. We could go on and think about what could be possible if the protesters succeed in getting a government with a strong prime minister who can name his or her own cabinet so that ministers are beholden to the Iraqi people and to the prime minister who leads them, and not to political parties. So ministries are no longer ATM machines for parties, but they are actually service providers. Imagine what could happen. We could spend lots and lots of money helping those ministries get up and running, providing services to their people so that we can have even more commercial relationships. Iraqis can have more jobs. They can come visit the United States as tourists. We can have trade relationships so that, you have investment relationships as well, so that you have projects like the ExxonMobil deal that people talk about, $50-60 billion of investment in the South. These could become routine. This would be great. You know what we were doing last year? We were petting baby tigers at the zoo in Baghdad. We were eating bagila out in the streets. We were going and having coffee in cafes. This is the kind of future that we want to see. And, we were getting very close to it, as Abbas said last year. There's no reason why we can't have this relationship between the United States and Iraq. That's what it should be. That's the strategic partnership we're talking about.
Thank you. Well, Abbas, looks like Prime Minister, caretaker Prime Minister, keeps making the claims that even without the U.S. force presence, that we can maintain a good relationship with Iraq. In the CR session, with the United States, in the CR session, he used the bad example, which is 2011, 2014. That was an unfortunate example, if you can put it this way, because these were the years when, ISIS was starting to regroup, and Maliki was on his campaign of against Sunni and against, other segments of the Iraqi government. Anyway, having said that, what are the scenarios that you see that playing out? Is it possible, given all that the U.S. has brought to this relationship over the years, which Joey has just referred to some numbers, is it possible to maintain this relationship going forward, or are we heading for a nasty divorce?
Well, again, I agree with Joey in everything he said on the accomplishments, on the importance of the U.S. presence in Iraq, the partnership. I don't have to even make that claim because I do this for a living. My entire work, day in and day out at the Atlantic Council, is to, facilitate, help in any way I can to create robust relations between the two countries. I'm a big believer that Iraq cannot survive in the international relations world without having a strong relationship with the United States, without taking out of mind the fact that there are regional realities that Iraq has to deal with. One of them is Iran, the other is Saudi, the other is Turkey. These are realities. These are thousands of years coexistence that they have to deal with. But the U.S., you need to make a case for it because it is, it's not obvious to so many people. And that is why I'm interested in this. The issue here is not Adel Abdul Mahdi wants or doesn't want U.S.-Iraqi relations. He does. He told me that in December. He continued to say that. His cabinet says that all the time. The question here is, back to your question on the scenarios, where are we now? We don't want to go back and revisit what happened in the past. Where we are now, whether we like it or not, the recent 3 weeks from hell that we were having, all of us, is this. They killed the business relations with between the United States and Iraq. I can't think of any company, U.S. company, in their right mind to go and open shop in Amara or in Nasiriyah or in any one of these cities in Iraq. That's not a possibility. The troops and all of what comes from the presence of U.S. troops there, that Joey just mentioned and I mentioned, their fate is hanging in the balance, and probably that they will not be there one way or another. There must be a reduction to avoid the storm that is facing the government. I can't think of defying all of these calls and keep the troops anyway, because then we are putting them in harm's way, and that's a problem. I will talk about the troops in a second after this third element. But it is important to do something about this. The presence of the troops is hanging in the balance, and I made a prediction. We do at the Atlantic Council every year in January, a prediction. And my 2019 prediction was that the troops were going to stay throughout 19. And even though there were calls and everybody thought that the US would be asked. And I said they would. And sure enough, they remained throughout 19. This year, I made the prediction that they will not stay throughout 2020, not the way we see them now. There are, of course, those who train on part of the weapon purchases and others, even Iraqis who push for it, they are willing to have them stay. There are other troops that are to guard American interests, etc. But the troops that came to fight ISIS, I think they will not be tenable to ready. But what we have viable is the diplomatic relations. And that is my focus that I want to leave you with today, if nothing else, is that we can still maintain the diplomatic relations and keep them as strong as they are. And if the diplomatic relations are maintained, they can bring back what has been lost recently, the business relations and the military relations. If we lose the diplomatic relations, it will be at least a decade before we even talk about anything to be gained back. I'm a historian of Iraq. I am one of the few people ever who wrote on US-Iraqi relations for 50 years. And every single major event in the 20th century that happened, David Mack here is my mentor in everything in life, and he will tell us that. Basically, every single event that happened in Iraq, we had no ambassador there. 1958, they didn't even know what these shots that were fired, but we had an ambassador. 1963, the ambassador was expelled over the Kuwait crisis. 1968 was expelled just after the Arab-Israeli war. And it continued. I can give you every single episode where until 2003, it's very hard to deal with Iraq if you don't have diplomatic relations in that sense. But to keep the diplomatic relations, we need to listen to the Iraqis. One of the major or most important things the Iraqi Minister of Foreign Affairs said once here in Washington, he said, the happiest we are is when the Americans don't mention Iraq. He was asked, I was asked about the State of the Union, and President Trump did not mention Iraq. He said, we are happy. It's not that we are disappointed he didn't mention it. When they don't mention it, this is the thing. So when you come out and say, I want this base to stay here because it's a beautiful base, we spent a lot of money on it, and I want to keep it. That's what the president said a few months ago. And you know what? There is a major item in the US-Iraqi strategic framework agreement says the US does not seek permanent bases. When you say, I want to keep the troops to monitor Iran, which is, again, smacking against the Article 8 of the Constitution, not to mention whether that mention of Iraq poisons the situation. When you come now in the middle of a crisis and you say, we will only leave if they pay us, otherwise we will take their money that are in American banks, and we are not going to leave, we will keep the troops. These are not helpful to maintain the relations. Just ignore Iraq and let the diplomats go there and work with the Iraqis and do it in a good way. It doesn't help. Yes, the US can make Iraq, and they did, not new. When you talk about we will slam Iraqis with sanctions, I disagree with the president when he said sanctions they never have seen before. The Iraqis saw sanctions that nobody can make them harder ever for 11 years. The worst sanctions that were put on any country. Or even the United States cannot put more sanctions on the Iraqis. But when you mention it to Iraqis who have lived through 11 years of sanctions, and you say, we'll even make it more, how are you going to really work with hearts and minds of a country? Dr. Shahla was exactly right when she talked about those who did not participate in it. But I disagree with you on one thing. They did not really do Iraq service. They did Iraq disservice when they did not show up. They should have been in the parliament and vote no. If they didn't want the US troops to be out, they should go there and vote no, rather than just disappear and let the vote to be semi-unanimous. Actually, unanimous it was. Okay, that was bad. If it showed one thing, actually two things. One of them is that when Iraqis are cornered to choose between Iran and the United States, they will choose the United States. Not because they love Iran more, it's because
They will
it's
choose
safer.
Iran.
It's Iran.
Yeah.
It will be safer for them to choose Iran than to use the United States, given what goes on in Iraq. And the second thing is that the vote showed us that the US doesn't have committed friends. Your committed friends are the ones who will go and vote no, not disappear, because this is a democratic system, and you know what? The vote is legal, the vote is binding, the vote is, in fact, according to the textbook democratic relations in Iraq. Binding here, I have to nuance it. It is binding in the de facto side. Mm-hmm. Right now, those who want to shoot, who want to commit violence, do any trouble, they have a parliamentary vote on them. It doesn't matter whether it's binding because the Supreme Court said or did not say. It is binding because you gave those people the ammunition they need to go. Do you think, how many of the Iraqis you think know the difference between a binding vote and non-binding vote in the parliamentary procedures? That doesn't matter. You go to them and say, Parliament voted, and the Parliament said, US out. The Prime Minister agreed. In fact, they voted on his suggestion. So why are the Americans on it? They should have gone, those who did not attend, and should have voted no, so we would see that division. Anybody who is absent and doesn't vote, just like in the elections, if you are not there, you cannot say this government doesn't represent you because, you didn't vote. You forfeited your right to choose a government, and you delegated it to someone else. These guys delegated their right to have a saying to those who were present, and those who were present, everybody knew. They were present to vote to get the US troops out. If we do not have committed friends, I don't see how we can see viable relations with Iraq. For our friends run away, and Iran's friends show up to vote. What's up with that?
Let me hear. I think we all heard also the pressure that was put on the parliamentarians and the threats of physical harm if they were to show up and vote no. The choice that many of them were given, do not show up, versus if you show up, you have to vote yes. So that was also, we have to take that into consideration. I don't think people want to be martyrs, to be very honest.
Well, to tell you what, the threat was even for those who didn't want to show up. And let's face it, so many groups in the parliament, so many blocs had significant absent members from that vote, and they didn't show up. The threat was go and vote and go and walk in lockstep, not just go and vote yes or vote no. And many of them did not go there. Again, here, courage is in that moment. If you don't show up, you might as well vote yes. It doesn't make a difference because you allowed the vote to be unanimous. And that's what it is. It was a unanimous vote, and it's damaging. Yes. And I think it shouldn't have been that way.
And that's damaging in a way for the unity of Iraq.
And for Iraq.
That's what I'm saying, for the unity of Iraq, because that's the fear now. If this division that exists today in Iraq on this issue is going to lead to division in Iraq.
Jim Jeffrey,
to a divided Iraq.
A great diplomat, Jim Jeffrey, who knows Iraq very well and served in Iraq very well. He said once to me, and it was on record, so he said the United States is big enough that it is able to lose any ally, or it can take any hit. And I agree with him. The problem here is that in this relation, even if people say the United States has lost Iraq or is about to lose Iraq or lost in Iraq, it's not going to hurt the United States. It's the Iraqis who lose most, because Iraq needs the US more than the US needs Iraq.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, this is not just Iraq's fault. It is really, I think, the blame goes 360 degrees.
Shahla, let's think about also part of the equation here going forward in terms of what Iraqi wants is a protest movement. As you refer to in your comments, there are people, protesters, youth, who despite kidnappings, despite all the threats, are still showing up, in the streets, demanding. And this time, You know, in the past, they were demanding end to Iranian dominant role in Iraqi decision-making process. After the strikes, they are now demanding or calling more, for respect of the sovereignty of Iraqi territory and for both the Americans and the Iranians to be out. How do you see this protest movement evolve from here as this, back and forth between the United States and Iran evolves?
The demonstrators are sacrificing a lot, especially since 10 days. The number of killings and assassinations have increased enormously. And the process, if we can call it, the process of assassination or the way those activists are targeted, it's done in a way to show lessons to others too, which it's assassination by itself and it's intimidating others as well. So, and that's my own opinion. Of course, I don't have close relations with the demonstrators, but I see it as an Iraqi, I see it as follows. The demonstrators can subside a little bit of their activities and then pick up again. And we are about or on the verge of having huge another comeback of the demonstrations, because since yesterday, as you rightly so mentioned, Muqtada Sadr is meeting militias in Iran.
And he called for a 1 million man march.
But he is also meeting Hadi al-Amiri in Iran to talk about the nomination for a new prime minister candidate. The same people and demonstrators who are asking for Iraq's sovereignty, legitimacy, they are appalled after more than 600 persons being killed for the sake of Iraqi sovereignty. You are bluntly go on TV, show pictures that the two large, supposedly largest parliamentarian group are meeting in Tehran to talk about the prime minister who, to replace the resigned prime minister who was resigned because Iraqis want sovereignty. Iraqis, I agree with Dr. Abbas that parliamentarian legal issues are complicated. I myself, in Washington, D.C., when I see Iraqi political talk shows, and I see activists who is not beyond 22 years old or 20 years old, explaining for me how the parliament is moving. When I see seminars, not in Baghdad, the capital, in Diqar, deep in the south, right in the desert, talking about what it means, what is there in the new national elections law, what are the weak articles, and how we can keep quiet now and let's move to another target. The demonstrators showed, and I'm following this since 3 years, the amount of political maturity, activism, civicness Iraqi people are showing. It's a real process of democratization process. Iraq is now starting to have a grassroots level democratization process. And that's where the United States is a valuable partner. Human rights, democracy, understanding of your rights, the Constitution articles and all that. That's where the whole package of the American principles and positions can be activated with Iraqis. And Iraqis, not that they will listen to the Americans. This is the Iraqi aspirations. Anyone can help Iraqis into their path, they will say yes. We are so pragmatic. I see our people, there is no this projection of positions. We are not in 2003. We are no more the country which was locked for 35 years. In 2003, it was the first time I have a mobile. There's nothing like this. Watch Iraqi TV, even the channels broadcasted, sponsored by the militias. See how vibrant the political debate is. All what we need now, support that human right, democratic process. Let's grow up. Going back to your point, the demonstrators became so strategic, politically savvy. They know on a Friday they have to say no to America as well as no to Iran. Otherwise, they are saying this, and 3 of them were killed yesterday. How about if they just say no to Iran? The sound of the militias guns in the south, I agree with Dr. Abbas. It's so high nowadays. It's so uncontrolled, out of legitimacy of Iraqi government. Yes, American business cannot open in Amara because there are 10 militias there. Yes. Let's consolidate power in the hands of the state. Let's have the only hope all Iraqis. Originally, I'm from Baghdad, by the way. When you talk to people from Baghdad, even those who live in affluent areas, that they don't need to demonstrate. They tell you, we don't have any other options. We have to go forward. The most strategic and important interest for Iraqis are 2 steps now. Elect a new prime minister with a clear, specific, strict mandate when you're going to hold early elections, and then hold early elections. Iraqi demonstrations, those are not people in the street as they've been portrayed at the first week of October. They are unemployed, uneducated, coming from underserved areas, so they are poor and they have to sacrifice. No, they are doctors, they are engineers, they are lawyers, they are students who basically locked their universities. And in Wasat, by the way, the interesting thing about the grassroots democratization that we see in Iraq, it's not only in capital, where Baghdad, where only the very high educated people. 2 days ago, it was in Wasat. The crackdown by the militia, pacified people in Karbala demonstrate here in Wasat. Stop Najaf, you go to the Qar. Stop Basra, you go to Baghdad. This is the voice of people who are saying, we know you are corrupted. We know your regional clientism. We know how you are faking and manipulating political rhetoric. No more. And we are going forward with this. And they are becoming the 3rd and important political party, which is not organized yet well, and on a purpose, but they have as strong as the political parties of the Sunnis or the Shias or the Kurds. They are powerful by themselves. So what we need is to support them.
Thank you. Joey, can you add to what Shahla said? Where do you see the protest movement evolve?
Well, we hope that it does not produce any more dead people, because 600 is 600 too many, and 20,000 wounded is 20,000 too many. I will take the opportunity, I know we have members of the media here too who might appreciate hearing that we're echoing the condemnation of the assassination of the digital TV correspondent Ahmed Abdel Samad and his cameraman Safa Ghali in Basra on Friday, just 3 hours or so after Ahmed had filed a report in which he was asking why the Iraqi security forces had been so efficient at keeping the peaceful demonstrators in check and pushing them down, but had not been capable of protecting the American embassy in Baghdad from the attacks by Kataib, Hezbollah, and others. So shot in the head in cold blood. Yeah. So that's what we hope we don't see anymore. We hope that the political parties will listen, but manifestly they're not if, as you said, hypocritically, they're going to a foreign country to decide what they want to do for supporting a prime ministerial candidate. That's even worse than having the special forces commander of that country come into the capital and go around like Qasem Soleimani was doing and meeting with political party leaders and kind of figuring out who was going to lead Iraq for them. So we hope the protesters succeed. We support them. We support their calls for reform. We have many of the same grievances that they do. We don't necessarily need friends, Dr. Abbas, in Iraq, because friends as you say, can sometimes be fickle. But we need nationalists. We need to work with committed nationalists in Iraq, because if they put Iraq's interests first, we think that those will overlap very much with the interests of the United States. And I think the protesters would agree, not necessarily with us politically every day, but they would agree with the benefits of a strong relationship between the United States and Iraq.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to open it for questions from the audience. We have interns here, staff with micros, and so I'm going to be calling. We'll go here first, then here. We'll start with these two questions. Please, micros here, microphone here, and then this, and then I'll go to the back. Please. Please identify your name.
Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. For Dr. Abbas, there's been discussion from President Trump on down about a greater NATO role in the Middle East and presumably in Iraq, where there's a need for training, counter ISIS, still ISIS in the country. If NATO were to play a bigger role in Iraq and presumably with the U.S. as a component of it, would that make the presence of foreign troops more politically palatable? Would you change your forecast that foreign troops will be out by the end of 2020? Or does it not really make a difference given the influence and control the U.S. has over NATO? And for Mr. Hood, what's going on with the initiative to get NATO more involved in Iraq? NATO has a training mission in Iraq now suspended. Is it going to go back? Is there any interest on NATO's part in expanding its activities in Iraq, given it has a stake in stabilizing the country, but also was not consulted about any of the recent U.S. military operations?
Thank you. Please, sir. Here.
So, I'm Heiko Garatz with Argus Media. A question for Mr. Hood. Have events of recent weeks make you reconsider the prospect of extending the sanctions favor that Iraq has for importing power and gas from Iran?
Which is expiring next month.
Which expires on February 11th.
Correct. Okay, we'll have first Abbas answer Phil's question, and then we'll turn to Joey.
Yeah, quickly, thank you for the question. I think, when we talk about foreign troops in Iraq, it's a euphemism for two different camps. For the camp that is pro-Iran, they talk about the American troops. And for those who are against Iran, they talk about the Iranian basically influence when they talk about foreign influence. I do not think that the Iraqis will be up in arms when, if it is a NATO operation. And by the way, my prediction that it's for 2020, it's a short term. I think we still can go back and reestablish military relations. It's just for the poisonous environment that we have right now. And that's what Adel Abdel Mahdi's issue here. Adel Abdel Mahdi does not want the US troops to be out because he's against any US Iraqi military cooperation. He is scared to death that something might happen and American troops would die on his watch because of a rocket attack or something. And that's why he wants them to be out as soon as possible, not because he doesn't want the idea of US troops in Iraq. But NATO, yes. There are a couple of things with Iraqis probably that might be caveats for NATO. If it is a US operation named NATO, so US troops being there labeled NATO, or the Turks, because normally NATO draws a lot of troops from Turkey, and the Iraqis have a little allergy, well, more than a little, when it comes to Turkish troops coming under any guise. These are the two things that might be, considered by the Iraqis. But NATO, or there are several other countries in Iraq that are operating. The problem again is go back to what Joey just mentioned. NATO doesn't operate in a full-fledged operation there. They use American infrastructure, they use American logistics, they use American protection and a lot of other things. And at the end of the day, NATO is not a country, it's the votes of those countries. Will the United States be happy to be replaced by NATO? Or other NATO members who might not agree with the United States on what the mission will be. So there are lots of questions, but from the Iraqi side, it's not about NATO. It's not about the French, the Italians, or the Australians. It is, about the United States, because there are people who want to get the United States out, not the idea of having foreign troops per se.
Joey.
Well, thank you for the question, Michael. The update on NATO, as Secretary Pompeo said in his statement on Friday, a NATO delegation was in town to discuss increasing that role in Iraq in line with the president's desire to see that. We had good discussions. I won't go into the details, but this is obviously a discussion that needs to take place not only here, but in Brussels and in capitals. But I think it's a shared desire of NATO members to see a strong and stable and sovereign Iraq. And so we need to continue the discussions about how NATO can better contribute to that. The other question about the sanctions waivers, that's a decision for Secretary Pompeo, and I can't speculate on what his decision will be in mid-February. But certainly, our goal remains that Iraq should have energy independence. The idea that Iraq has to import energy from anyone is really just ludicrous when you think about it, all of the energy resources that country has. So we want to get down to the business of helping Iraq take full advantage of those energy resources and not be reliant on any other country, especially Iran, because we want Iraq to be able to be sovereign, to be able to make decisions without undue influence, members of parliament being threatened if they don't vote this way or that way, or special forces commanders coming in and saying, you political party, you'll do this and you'll do that, or you'll come to Iran and we'll talk about it here. That's just not what anybody wants to see. I would just add to what Dr. Abbas said about the prime minister. If he's really so afraid of U.S. personnel being harmed on his watch, then he would order the Iraqi security forces to do a lot more to protect us, because that rocket attack that killed the American citizen was just one of 10 or 11 that had happened in the previous couple of months, which killed and wounded Iraqi soldiers as well.
Yes.
There was another attack on Beled yesterday, and as I was coming in here, I heard about reports of an attack on Taji. I don't know if they're accurate or not, but this has got to stop. You can't have one part of the Iraqi government saying, I'm free to launch rockets against whoever I want, including Iraqi security forces, and the other part of the government not doing anything about it.
Questions from the audience. I'm going to go to the back, please. Yes, there. Yes, sir. I'll take 2 questions. Yes.
Ken Meyer, Court Independent Observer. Following up on your last comment, Mr. Hood, when the rockets are likely to continue to rain down on the Green Zone and eventually kill some Americans, when that happens, should we hold Iran responsible?
And then another question there in the back, sir. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much. Bryant Harris with Al Monitor. My question is for Mr. Hood. I want to ask about Iraq sanctions. More broadly, the president has made fairly explicit threats to sanction Iraq if they kick out U.S. troops. And, the AFP reported the other day that U.S. officials have threatened to cut Iraq off from its oil revenue. So with your goal of a stable, more prosperous Iraq, aren't there any concerns that sanctioning Iraq could, exacerbate the economic crisis there, lead to more Iranian control, potential resurgence of ISIS, et cetera, et cetera? Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Well, the first question from Ken, it was, certainly we hope and pray that no more Americans get killed or wounded as a result of attacks from Iran and its proxies in Iraq or anywhere else. But certainly the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have made very, very clear that if that happens, we will hold Iran responsible because it created these proxies, it funded them, it funds them, it provides training and logistical support to them, as well as advanced weapons. there's no way that they can hide behind this supposed distance that they have from them. This has been made clear since at least May 7th of last year, a date that will remain seared in my memory when I heard that the Secretary of State was going to visit us on short notice in Baghdad because he wanted to very dramatically make that point to the Iraqi government and to the Iranian proxies in Iraq. And since that time, we've been passing intelligence. We've been imploring the Iraqi government to take measures to protect us and to protect coalition forces and Iraqis themselves. And unfortunately, as you've seen, the results are not what we wished.
Okay, and the other question?
Oh, right. Well, I certainly don't want to speculate on what we could do if this happens or that happens. I would just refer back to what I said earlier, which is that, as we've seen before, if you don't have a solid security relationship that keeps extremists like the Daesh at bay, then you also don't have a very solid environment for investors. You don't have a very solid economy. There's lots of consequences that come from that. So that's why we want to have a recommitment to this strategic relationship so that it's solid on all levels, the diplomatic side, the security side, the financial side, and the trade and other sides, so that it's not just one thing or another, but it's all for one.
Shahla, if sanctions were to be applied, what will be the impact on the protest movement?
The Iraqi people will hold Iraqi government, not the Americans.
They will hold the Iraqi government accountable.
Because
if US sanctions were applied.
Yes, and again, I don't want to speculate or anything like this. I agree. I lived under sanctions in Baghdad, so I know it day by day, and I know it's for 12 years, and everyone in Iraq knows what it means in sanctions, including the Kurdistan region, by the way. So Iraqis understood that the sanctions were imposed on Iraq because of Saddam's reckless decision to invade a neighboring Arab country, that's Kuwait. And it's more reckless decision to sacrifice Iraq for the sake of him staying in power. The same analysis or analogy and causality, it's in the mind of Iraqis. They know that who are bringing this on us is not because President Trump wake up in the morning and said, I need to impose sanctions on Iraq. No. They understood, and they understand nowadays through their demonstrations and intimidately because they are under assassinations, and that's real threat that they no more sanctions. I want my child to go to a good school. It's as Joy Hood mentioned now, that last year we were able to go to cafes and it's flourishing everywhere, including the south and Kurdistan. In Iraq, in Baghdad, in Basra, we started to have international schools teaching in English. That's apart from Kurdistan region who started this path years ago.
Yes.
My point, people lived and understood what it means to have a little bit of peace and prosperity and sovereignty.
If I may add to my answer, we are levying sanctions on Iraqis right now, and we're going to do that more. We have been holding individuals accountable for gross violations of human rights and for gross corruption, and we're going to continue doing that. And that, we think, is one of the most effective ways that we can support the hopes and aspirations of the protesters and to demonstrate to members of the Iraqi political parties that they can choose to have a good relationship with the United States and the rest of the Western countries, or they can decide to go down the path of being a pariah. The choice is up to them. And this is, again, you know, that time that Shahla is talking about last year, that things looked so hopeful. It was the Iranians that made the decision in April and May, strategically to go to much harsher threats against us and against the Iraqis who were hosting us. And that's where the blame lies.
What will be the impact of economic sanctions on the protest movement, if applied?
That's a good question. I mean, it's first of all, I think I'm more worried about the impact on the Iraqi people, because
I mean, the protesters are Iraqis, right?
No. In general, then when we pick just a group of Iraqis,
Iraqi people,
the Iraqi people in general, because the sanctions would mean what? Would mean just preventing Iraq from selling oil. That's what it is, and all Iraqi budget is coming from oil.
Correct.
Now, under Saddam Hussein, there was not much of a difference between pre-sanctions and post-sanctions, because there was not its kind of prosperity in general, salaries and all of that. Iraqis now have been out of that huge prison that Saddam put them through. And if we go back to the era of sanctions where everything is crunched, that will be impossible for the new generation that did not see adversity. For them, it's going to be a new game. But that's big in that sense. Iraqis are, we have 40 million people, close 38 million people. We don't really have the true numbers until a census is conducted, but around that. And to put sanctions on them in the way the president just said, I mean, I would never really think that is going to happen, but if it happens, then that's going to be demoralizing. I mean, I think one of the lasting consequences of the sanctions in the 1990s wasn't much of the hardship that people lived, even though it was awful to live through, but the sanctions changed the fabric of Iraqi society.
Yes.
The demoralization of a society that moved. When I went back to Iraq after the change of the regime, I did not recognize my own family, the ones that I lived with in the 70s. They were different people in everything. I can go on and on about that, but this was, it went deep into the psyche of the Iraqi and altered it completely. And nobody really wants to see the Iraqis go through this again. But on the protesters, I think it will have, if Shahla is right, and I have no reason why, to question her conclusion, then the protesters will be benefiting from it, because then the government will be held accountable, and then the political process will produce a better government that will undo the sanctions. Doesn't have to be 11 years, 12 years sanctions. But if the alternative is correct, mostly the people will pay the price, and the political elite will end up enjoying their time, and they can pin all of their failures and shortcomings on the sanctions, as Saddam did, as the Iranians are doing it now, as the Cubans did it for a long time. Sanctions have never worked anywhere historically, and anybody who tells you that sanctions accomplish anything, they must be out of their mind. If they accomplish political ends, you will lose a whole population from it, and you will lose more than just what you accomplish in politics. It's inhumane, it is immoral, and it is the worst thing anybody does, to hold a innocent people accountable for the shortcomings and the criminality of a regime, because the regime does not end up suffering, and the people who suffer. See North Korea, see Cuba, see all of the other countries, Spain under, and the days of sanctions. You just pick any country, and you will see what the result. And Iraq, again, is probably the classic textbook example of how sanctions were all what I described. So let's hope that both the Iraqi political leadership, which is its moral duty, its political duty, its legal duty to steer their country out of this horrible possible outcome, and also I think the rest of the international community needs to stand with the Iraqis. You cannot just point fingers. Let's remember the fiasco in Iraq is the doing of everybody who was involved in it. It's not just the Iraqis, and I think everybody has to help pick up the pieces. We cannot just blame, others and forget what others have done to Iraq, and that's not right. So again, it's the protesters almost got their goals accomplished. They toppled the government. They had the parliament work on a new elections commission, a new elections law. Everything was going when there were TV cameras 24 hours, 7 days a week on the protests. Now they have been taken back, and a new newsworthy story has come out. They tried to kick this, recently, a couple of days ago, where they came out and made the big demonstrations, and they did that. And hopefully this will pick again, so the pressure will be on the government to continue the promises that they do not just circumvent what the accomplishments that happened. I wasn't there in October when they started, and then have been watching the development of it. I agree with Joey that the price has been very painful. They produced a lot of deaths. It's heartbreaking to see those little children, gathering before their father's pictures, and they were killed just because they said a word, or they filed a report, or they simply demonstrated. This has been the worst anybody would have expected from a political regime, and also from a parties and anybody who was operating and killing those activists. But I think if we were to help the protests, and if we were to help reform, we should do it better than just slam Iraq with sanctions. There are many ways to stand with the protesters by the international community, rather than just hope that a bad social situation will undermine the government and help them as a byproduct.
Thank you. Sir? And sir here. Please, first here. You don't need, no, but I think we need, because we are taping, or because people are taping.
Oh.
Yeah. Microphone here, please.
Yeah.
Here. No, sir, here. Yes, here. Sorry, I'll come back to you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Adel Saidili from International Bridges NGO. I'd like to talk about the U.S.-Iraqi relation away from the military and war and everything. I'm talking about the relation between Iraq and the United States on public level. The Iraqi people are confused. I'm coming to a question after that.
No,
just a short.
No, allow me to really ask you to get to the question right away, please.
Right, but
no, because there are many people who would like to ask questions. Please, sir, get to the question.
Okay, so the U.S. diplomacy has failed actually to promote a good relation between Iraq and on public level. Even Al Hurra, which is funded by the Congress, used to be a very good TV station promoting these kind of things. They have changed. They are actually now considered to be against the Iraqi government. Now, my question is, how can we actually work all together to give the good intention of the U.S. society, U.S. government toward the Iraqi people after actually bringing the incredible democracy in Iraq, where people can have these kind of protests and can actually change things, which is happening in the parliament?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for getting to the question. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Vlad Pavlov. I'm with TASS News Agency. And my question is for Mr. Hood. The members of Iraqi parliament said that the country is considering possible purchase of Russian S-400 air defense missile systems in response to concerns that the US may withdraw its support for Iraq. So what's your position on that? And could it trigger the US sanctions against Iraq?
No, thank you, sir. Let me take one more question here, and then we'll turn it over to the panel.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Hideki Matsunaga. I'm from the World Bank. My question is, what should we do? We means maybe Iraqi government to international community with PMU. PMU is not monolithic. It's Iranian affiliated and non-Iranian affiliated. So what can we do? And maybe second question is, in this connection, what can we do also in order to stop the re-emergence of the ISIS? Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 questions. Please, Joey, would you like to start? And then I'm going to turn it over to Shahla and to Abbas on the issue of the PMU as well. Please.
Okay, we'll try to make it a speed round. First of all, Al-Hurra is editorially independent. It is funded by the Congress, but it has total independence editorially. So what direction it decides to take is its own. But I think I think what we need to do better is talking about a lot of these numbers that I talked about earlier and making that a reality for the Iraqi people. You can't imagine how many sites I visited around Iraq to celebrate the opening or the finishing of some project, and people said, well, what are you going to do for us here? And I'm here to, inaugurate a hospital or something. The people living just a mile away didn't even know that we had funded these things. So we've tried to change that to help people understand that we're the biggest humanitarian donor, biggest donor to demining, biggest donor to so many things that are not security related. And just imagine if we can do that with these circumstances right now that are less than ideal. Imagine what we could do together if we were fully working together and not having one part of the government rocketing us while the other part of the government stands by. So number 2, the S-400s, yes, a purchase would probably trigger sanctions. So we advise our partners not to make such purchases. Hidaysan talked about the popular mobilization forces not being monolithic. We absolutely recognize that. We understand and recognize the brave sacrifices of the many ordinary Iraqis who stood up, volunteered at a critical moment when their country needed them, and went right to the battlefield and helped stop the advance of Daesh. This narrative out there that somehow Qasem Soleimani and his henchmen got out there and really stopped Daesh on behalf of the Iraqis is absolutely false. And I think people who know better should be making that clear to everyone. It was the volunteers who answered the call of Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, and not those who have been following the terrorism of Qasem Soleimani for years and years that stopped Daesh.
Shahla, questions on what can we do about the PMU and prevent the emergence of ISIS, please.
The international community, in terms of including the United States, in terms of the militias, and with all types of militias, the pro-Iranian and backed by Iran militia, including, and they are the number one hurt for Iraqi legitimacy and sovereignty. The international community can do Iraq a favor by supporting the political will of some parts of the Iraqi government and politicians to really consolidate power in the hand of the state. Iraq itself, the governing structure of Iraq, the constitution of Iraq, the legal framework of governments in Iraq and provincial governments, all have clear articles and approach and vision against any forces outside the legitimacy of Iraqi government and Iraqi state. Iraqi governments, including Adel Abdel-Mahdi, who we have big reservations against his performance, is against the militias. But who empowers the militias is a state that's bigger than Iraq nowadays. In terms of bigger, I mean more powerful, that's Iran. So if we can empower the Iraqi governing system and constitutional system, that's the support that the international community, including the United States, can do to empower those Iraqi political factions that's calling and trying for the reconsolidation of power in the hand of states. The international community should not address the problem of the militia by themselves directly. This should be done through an Iraqi legal framework and initiative. We call it disarmament or integration. And by the way, former Prime Minister Abadi and Abdel Mahdi, they issued decrees and decisions and all that. They did it for political reasons, but at the end of the day, these are legal binding decisions by Council of Ministers. So what we need, political will to implement, to activate these legal framework. If we can empower the political environment in Iraq towards that, that will be important. Another parallel issue that will help the marginalization and for the sake of the well-being of the Iraqi state is to empower the demonstrations and the democratization. If we have a new prime minister with a clear mandate for holding new elections, this upcoming election, we will not have Asabah al-Haq in the parliament. I will step back very quickly. All what we are seeing and the critical escalations in Iraq is not because Iranian, United States and all that. Iraq been suffering from chronic problems and it's been servicing and emerging since last summer. Right after the elections, we had killings in Basra and all that. All what the current incidents happened since last week is that the Iraqi government trying to find another enemy to fight apart from the demonstrations. So the international community can support the legal framework and Iraqi people because that's what is sustainable.
Last word for you.
Well, thank you. I agree. I think, well, first of all, three areas the world can work on. First of all is to end the need for them. They are there not because, Iraq has this luxury that they want to just have militias around. They came because there was an existential threat to the Iraqi government, and the military and other security forces that were supposed to protect Iraq failed. They ran away. So as long as the military is not having the full confidence of the people and the government and everybody around the world, then there is an argument for the existence of the PMUs. That's why the United States forces are important in Iraq, to build the capacity of the Iraqi forces and to equip them and to do all of that. So that's one. Second, the economic issue. I have written a couple of times, actually more, and numerous times I said it on the stage. It is reckless to send these people home, without having an economic environment to receive them and give them jobs and alternative ways of living. These people are making salaries. For them, it's a way of feeding their families. And if we learned one thing from the US experiment in Iraq in 2003, was dismissing a group of armed people in the military with a combat experience under their belt and telling them, go home, there is nothing for you. These are people who were seasoned by combat. Some of them will tell you they can make an IED of what's on the table. And if they are around, there are so many bad places in Iraq and out of Iraq that they will be recruited for. Do we want that? We have thousands and tens of thousands actually of them. You don't want to send them to an economy that has no jobs and that has no alternatives for them because you are just giving a gift to anybody who want to recruit them. And the third is what just Shahla mentioned, which is the legal way. There is a law actually that was passed by Parliament. That is 2016. Mm-hmm. That was the PMU law or the Popular Mobilizations Law that specified exactly what they need to be done. Prime Minister Abadi didn't want to implement it because he didn't want to do it in the middle of a fight. After the fight was over and victory was declared over ISIS, there was an election time and he didn't want to confront them in an election time. And he was right because they were very popular and they gained vote. They were the second vote getter. And then after he lost his bid for a second term, Prime Minister Abdel Mahdi, until today, he has not had the chance to really be firm in the saddle to go against them. Here, you really need to, so all three, you need to give confidence so there is a strong case that is made to get them out. The second thing is to give them an alternative so when they go there, they don't feel bitter and they feel like they want to get back at the nation that was ungrateful to them. Many of them sacrificed, and Joey just is right, amazingly. And then third is basically to do it right and do it in a legal way and do it with the rule of law in mind. Once this is all done, then we definitely will have no problem with it. It just end the conditions that made them exist and last. That's what it is, and they are economic, military, and legal.
Rhonda, before we wrap up, I just want to deplore once again all of the threats, all of the actions taken against media outlets in Iraq, including Al Hurra, the closure of their offices, and the threats to their staff. This is not the way a democracy works. These are the tactics of the regime in Tehran, and this is not what we want to see in Iraq, and I don't think any Iraqi wants to see that either.
Of course not.
I second that. They shouldn't be intimidated.
First, we are running out of time. We have run out of time. Let me thank the audience for your active participation. My apologies to those of you who basically I could not give you the floor to ask your questions. You have the opportunities to approach the panelists, after this is over and ask your questions directly to them. And lastly, but not, I would like to thank our esteemed group of panelists who really provided excellent discussions today on an issue that is of utmost importance to both Iraq and the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.